It is 2 p.m. Monday, the 21st of January in Port Hedland, Australia, and now we have not only one but now two tropical lows to worry about in the Australian region, with the latest one to form out over the Kimberley coast. The tropical low in question is still inland just to the south of Broome, but as you can see from the official forecast from the Bureau of Meteorology, this low is moving west toward the outer waters to the north of Western Australia, and it is forecast to become a Category 1 within the next 48 hours. Therefore, tropical cyclone watches have been issued from Pardue westward to Onslow. Here is some of the latest wording from the first tropical cyclone advice issued. They say that the low may develop into a tropical cyclone by Wednesday as it moves toward the west-southwest off the Pilbara coastline. Gales are not expected in coastal areas within the next 24 hours, but if the system does reach cyclone intensity, then gales could develop between Pardue and Onslow on Wednesday. The State Emergency Services advise that there are no community alerts at present, but communities between Pardue and Onslow should listen for the next advice. The latest daytime visible satellite imagery shows a well-defined low-level circulation, but once again it is still inland. However, based on the current heading, it will be offshore within the next 6 hours. As we turn to the enhanced infrared, you can see that much of the convection associated with the tropical low is far removed from the center of circulation, but it will be interesting to see if more convection can fire near the low-level center once it begins to move over warm water temperatures. In addition, the latest water vapor imagery shows a very moist mid to upper level atmospheric profile, so more convection should be able to develop with time. We have also taken a look at some of the latest weather balloon data along the western Australia coastline, and the first graphic that you're looking at is a skew-T sounding from Learmonth, and this first line represents temperature, and the line right next to it represents the dew point. Now, if the temperature and dew point lines are rather close together, then that would represent a fairly moist and favorable profile for tropical cyclones. We still have some dry air out west, but as we move our way eastward, now looking at the Port Hedland sounding, you can see that things are a lot more moist, especially in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. And finally, as you head on over toward Broome, where the center of circulation is closest, this is very saturated. So based on water vapor and weather balloon data, conditions do appear favorable, at least in terms of moisture, for additional intensification over the next 24 hours. As we turn to the regional water vapor imagery, you can also get the idea that the vertical wind shear values are also fairly low. You don't see much in the way or a sign of wind shear values being rather high because the cloud tops are not being blown off too quickly as soon as the convection develops, and there are no immediate mid to upper level troughs in the area. Also, as we turn to some of the latest graphical charts from the University of Wisconsin, beginning with the low-level vorticity, this graphic also confirms that the center of circulation is just to the south of Broome, moving westward, but that comes as no surprise. But as we look at some of the latest wind shear values, this also confirms what we were looking at on the visible and water vapor imagery, with little to no sign of vertical wind shear. We do have this favorable upper-level ridge axis moving westward in tandem with the tropical low, so water temperatures, vertical wind shear, and moisture all appear to be favorable for this storm to develop as long as that center of circulation can remain offshore for at least 24 to 36 hours and then have more of a chance to intensify. The latest surface forecast from the GFS forecast model over the next 24 hours shows the center of circulation starting to reemerge offshore just to the east-northeast of Port Hedland, but despite the rather favorable conditions being presented currently, the model is not overly enthusiastic about aggressively developing the system into our robust tropical cyclone. If anything, we only see weak to moderate strengthening as the center of circulation continues to parallel the coast. So it looks as though that land interaction will continue to be the biggest problem with development of this cyclone, which is rather good news because although that we could still face gale force winds along those coastal areas, this would still ensure that the cyclone remains relatively weak, and as we go into 72 and 96 hours, it begins to move westward further away from the coastline once beyond the Gascoyne region, and it would continue to take a track somewhat like what we just saw with Cyclone Narelle. Additionally, we will be receiving another update from the ECMWF model within the next 4 hours, but the most recent 12Z run of the ECMWF was very similar to the GFS that we just saw. As we go into the next 18 to 24 hours, much like the GFS, it has the surface circulation correctly moving offshore well to the southwest of Broome, but the latest run from the European is a little more aggressive than what we just saw with the GFS model, but the track is almost 100% in agreement with the latest GFS depiction. And finally, by day 5, we see the very weak area of low pressure still situated to the northwest of Exmouth and continuing to move offshore. So based on the latest GFS and European, if you take the consensus between those two models, the center of circulation just hugs the coast for the next 3 to 5 days, but remains relatively weak, more than likely at nothing more than a Category 1 cyclone. Finally, this is a look at the mid-level steering being advertised by the 12Z run of the ECMWF model. As we go into 24 and 48 hours, we can see the very weak tropical cyclone paralleling the Pilbara, and the main steering factor for these tropical lows continues to be this mid-level steering ridge. And as we go into 72 hours, you will notice that there is a bit of a weakness right along Western Australia, and that is thanks to this mid to upper level trough that is swinging through, especially toward the south near Perth. Now, if the tropical cyclone were to develop much stronger than what the GFS and European are currently showing, then the cyclone would have a greater tendency to feel the influences of the mid-level steering, which would be this trough, and that would induce more of a southerly turn into the coastline. However, as we saw, the models are fairly consistent with the idea that the tropical low will remain weak, and that will lessen the chances of the cyclone feeling the influences of this progressive eastward moving trough, and that is the reason why the models are showing the tropical low continuing to slide toward the west with little fanfare. Finally, by day 5, the ridge is beginning to build back toward Exmouth, with that trough now firmly moving toward the east, now at this point over the Coral Sea. So it's almost a catch-22 in terms of the cyclone risk, because a stronger cyclone would imply a greater threat of a direct landfall, but due to the already close proximity to the coastline, it is unlikely that this cyclone will intensify into much more than a Category 1. Nonetheless, and no matter the situation, we always encourage residents to prepare for the worst. So if you live in some of those coastal areas like Port Hedland, it certainly would not hurt to get that cyclone kit if you have one ready to go, just in the event that it may have to be used within the next few days. But other than some nuisance rain and some gusty winds along with some minor water level rise right along the coast, this tropical low does not seem to be a significant tropical cyclone threat. But as always, we will continue to follow this low along with the tropical action near the Gulf of Carpentaria very closely for you here at 28storms.com, so stay tuned for more updates.